Hi guys, we are starting a new little series in our devotions, midweek devotions today, and we're going to look at the book of Ruth. Ruth is a short book in the Old Testament, found or placed in the time between the people of Israel arriving in the Promised Land, but before they have kings, before Saul and David and Solomon, so that in-between period. And there's a whole book of the Bible called Judges, describing the events of various men who lead and one woman who lead Israel. And the start of Ruth, we're going to look at today, is a picture really of somebody going against the grain. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those videos of somebody driving the wrong way up a motorway. And all the cars, car after car after car, are going all the same way. And then there's one car causing utter havoc as it goes against the flow of the traffic. Everybody's going left and that one guy is going right. That's the picture that the opening words of the book of Ruth paints for us. Let me read to you. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. As we read these words, if we've been spending time in the Old Testament, this jars. Up till now, all the flow of the story has been into the Promised Land, into Israel. And now there's this one man who takes his family out. Why? Why does he do it? And I guess, of course, at one level, the answer's clear. Because there's a famine. There's no food. But if we're to read this through a spiritual lens, what we see going on here is a lack of trust. A lack of trust that God will provide for this man, Elimelech, and his family. What happens when you give up on God? It's the question that the text is asking of us. What happens? Well, let's read. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. What happens when you give up on God? When you go your own way? Death. That's example number 1. But there's a second example that we find in the text. Let's keep reading. The 2 sons married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. Moab was an enemy of God's people. And all of God's people had been commanded not to marry with other peoples. Because God knew what was best for them, and he knew if they married with other peoples, their hearts would go after other gods. This is why you don't leave the land, because it leads to other temptations. Sin is a slippery slope. It was for them, and it is for us. And again, we want to say on one level, we can understand, can't we, why these 2 men, Mahlon and Chilion, would want to be married. Marriage is a good thing. It's a good thing for young men to want, to desire to be married. But they give up on God. They give up on his will. They give up on his ways. And they marry these foreign women, Ruth and Orpah. And again, listen to what the text says. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died. When we turn away from God and we turn away from his promises, the eventual end is death. Now this story is a story of grace, God's undeserved kindness shown to Naomi and to Ruth. And we'll get there. But it starts out with a stark reminder of the cost of turning our back on God. And so before we get to the story of Naomi and the story of Ruth and the story of Boaz, we start with a warning. Don't play with sin. Don't downplay its seriousness. Don't rationalize it. Instead, turn from it, run from it, flee from it, kill it. They're the commands that the New Testament gives us in regards to sin, in regards to those desires we find within us to go my way, not God's, and to not trust in God's provision and God's promises. And we want to take note of what happens even in these first few verses, the fact that one sin leads to another. Because that is the pattern. When we sin once, we make the next sin a little bit easier. Sin grows. A single sin greases the wheels for bigger sins and more sins. So we must be warned about the seriousness of sin. But we also want to heed the words, God's words to us. That if we do turn from our sin, there is grace, there is forgiveness. 1 John 1 verse 9 says that if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. If we put our hopes not in our own ability to make it right, but if we put our hopes onto Jesus, onto his atoning death for us at the cross, then we will find forgiveness. Then we will find purification. We will be washed clean. Next time out, we'll see that the focus shifts away from the men and their folly and towards the women and their wisdom. So tune in again next week.